What up, artists? My name is Dwayne Jones. I'm the creative director and founder of a lifestyle brand called Art Pays Me. This is the Art Pays Me podcast, and I'm passionate about finding ways that people like you and me can make a living for ourselves off of our creativity. And, maybe we can make the world a better place at the same time. Let's get into it. All right, everyone, welcome to Art Pays Me. Today we have DK. DK, what do you do?
What do I do? Well, I do a lot of things. I guess would consider myself to be a beat maker, producer, musician, even dabble in a little bit of uh, audio engineering too.
Okay.
But, yeah, that'd be a good start.
How long you been doing this?
I think I made my first beat in 2008, so it's been almost 12 years.
Wow, you're a veteran.
I know, me too.
Yeah, you look young to be working that long.
Yeah, I started at a young age, but still like, yeah, it feels like it's just been forever. But I guess It's funny the way time works because, like, I look back like even 2 years ago and it just flies. It's like nothing really in the grand scheme of things.
Right. So there's a lot of keys in your music. Is that samples, or are you actually playing those keys?
Probably both.
Okay.
Sometimes I sample keys, sometimes I play.
All right.
And sample myself.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. So where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in just outside St. John's, Newfoundland. It's like community. It's called Torbay. So if you know the airport, basically it's right next to the airport.
Okay. Cool. And like, were you the type of kid that was like banging on pots and pans and all of that?
No, I never actually banged on too many pots and pans, but I was told when I was younger I used to sing a lot, so I guess that would make sense a little bit.
Right. So like music's just always been a thing that you.
It's always been a thing. Yeah, my parents always played music and that type of thing. So. Okay.
All right. Cool. So like, what kind of music did your parents play in the house? I'm curious.
Like a lot of classic rock. A lot of classic rock. Like I'll say, the Beatles. Who else? Like Billy Joel. I know. Yeah, mostly classic rock. Queen. I think bands like that typically. So, but they also listen to like a lot of other stuff as well. But I would say that's what I remember mostly just being played.
Right. Yeah. Right. Just listening to your music, there's a lot of it has a jazz feeling to it. Is that something that you listen to?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of jazz. It's probably my favorite genre of music.
Oh yeah, I get like even like that Coltrane of the Movement song, with Agriculture, Timbuktu, and Ghetto Socks. I was checking that out, and I was like, yeah, this is definitely giving me some jazz vibes. And like, do you feel like even like those, like the classic rock sort of influences you in a subtle way? Because I don't necessarily pick it up in your music.
That's a good question. I don't associate myself like with the classic rock influence, but like a lot of the times back then, people just kind of made good music more so than now. So I'd say more so than anything. That's what I take away from that.
Got you.
Like everybody back then could play. Like I can't really say that nowadays, if that makes any sense.
Right. So for you, it's important that like you're not just sampling sounds. You're actually part of like building something up from a ground level with layers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's my style. But I mean, if somebody just wants to use samples, like I don't, consider them any less of a beat maker producer, because that's like that's where the essence, that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
And there's obviously sampling really good musicians. So.
So what is it about, like, would you consider yourself a hip hop producer?
Yeah, I do.
So what is it about hip hop that you're drawn to as a kid in Newfoundland?
Good question. I just used to have a friend that who was a neighbor basically, and he just like used to play some different kind of hip hop. Like he used to play like A Tribe Called Quest and like some Nas and stuff like that when we were younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I just like the rhythm part of it, and I was like, "What is this?" Because I never
Mm-hmm.
really listened up to that point like a whole lot. So then essentially what I did is like I just went back and dug into like what some of these bands and or artists were referencing. Like for example, Tribe and like Nas. You know, they would reference like a lot of they were sampling a lot of jazz and a lot of soul.
Yeah.
So I think that I kind of pinpointed that that's the part of it that I liked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it interesting. I grew up in Bermuda, and hip hop at that time in the '80s, it was still kind of early, and it wasn't the thing that people were listening to. So a lot of my friends who were into hip hop, we were kind of like the outsiders a bit, and it hadn't hit pop like the way it has today. So I find it a little interesting how people sort of come to hip hop in from different places that aren't necessarily
Yeah,
like New York or whatever the case may be. Um,
yeah.
like, what is it about the music production side that you like? Like, why didn't you get into singing or rapping or some other part of music?
Good question. I used to be in like a choir and stuff like that in school, and we used to sing a little bit, but for whatever reason, I never, um, yeah, but for whatever reason, I just never thought to be like a singer or anything like that. Um, and I guess when I just became more mature, got a little bit older and just became more mature, I just liked it. And that's kind of just like what I started doing. I don't know. It just
Mhm.
happened naturally. If that
Gotcha.
makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, it makes sense. And like, what kind of software do you use?
So right now I use my DAW as Logic Pro,
Okay.
but I also have a machine um, sampler as well,
Yeah.
and I have a keyboard as well. Yeah, so those are my main staples. When I
Okay.
first started, I actually had like an MPC 2000, so that was the same one I think Kanye West used, and
Mm-hmm.
Jay Dilla. I think no, actually he had a 3000, but Q-Tip, I think, also a 2000, but I had that was like a pretty good piece. But I just
Mm-hmm.
found the technology is just like evolved so much, and it just used to take so long to say record each individual track into the computer once the beat was done. And I was like, there has to be an easier way, so I just kind of switched to software
Right.
after that.
Right.
And the
So like,
Machine Studio like just lets me keep the like because there's pads on that. It just kind of lets me keep the like the feel of the MPC, but it's a
gotcha.
more in the software lane. If that
Yeah. No, makes sense. And I was also listening to this song you got with called "Keep It Real" with Justo the MC,
yeah,
and I got some strong Wu-Tang vibes from that.
did you?
Yeah, in a song like that, does the rapper come to you? And I noticed like he referenced Wu-Tang a little bit in his lyrics. So was that like a he knew he was gonna do that and he said, I want a beat that sounds like it could be Wu-Tang influence, or was it like he heard the beat and then came up with the lyrics?
Well, he heard the beat and then he came up with the lyrics. But after we added the Method Man scratch at the end
Uh-huh.
of it, because he did mention Wu Tang, so we said,
Hmm.
okay, well, might as well just commit
Right.
to it now. But I just find anytime, for whatever reason, anytime that like you sample a certain type of like, I think that song, yeah, there was like a guitar that I sampled and then built around. It just like for whatever reason just gave it like that type of vibe.
Mm, got
Yeah.
you. I've been I talk to beat makers and producers quite a bit, and there's always this issue of getting rappers to listen to their music or work with them. How are you finding that? Like, what's your strategy for working with rappers or getting their attention?
Um, it's good. That's a really good question. I think I've gotten better at this as time has gone on. But I find that if the music is quality, like to a certain extent, like there's tons of people that are actually looking for music and looking for beats and that type of thing. And I think if you just like kind of approach it in a professional way,
Mm-hmm.
um, well, what can happen then is once you approach it in a professional way, um, it's not really that hard. I find as long as it's a match. Like I wouldn't, for example, I'm more so in the lane of like traditional hip hop. Like I wouldn't go and necessarily reach out to like a trap artist. But
Mm-hmm.
if I know somebody in New York, or if I just do some like searching through SoundCloud or that type of thing, and I hear somebody's music that I like, I may message 20 people. I may only hear back from like two or three, but it's a kind of a numbers thing at that point.
Got you. Got you. And at this point, are you charging rappers for beats, or is it more like a trying to get established
Most
thing?
of the time, I just try to get established, and I
Uh-huh.
just give away a lot of things. But I have sold some music in the past as well. I kind of
Okay.
just depends on what exactly, how much time I have, and that type of thing.
Right.
Mostly,
Do you find, I'm curious about this. Have you found it like more difficult to work with people who are um charging? I mean, like who people who are paying you or people who are not paying you?
well, usually what I do is I actually put the art first.
Okay.
So what that means is that like I prefer to just like for example, if I think that there's potential in somebody and they're a good person and they're good to work with, well, in that situation, I'll just give them some beats for free and say, okay, well, let's collaborate on this and see where this goes. But there have been like situations in the past, like I don't do it as much anymore, but like online, I just used to put beats for sale and like I wouldn't know who would buy them. And it's like a
Mm,
cool, like $100 here, $100 there. But at the end of the day, it's just like you don't know the people on a personal level,
mm,
and you don't know, and you have no say once the beat is sold what the music is actually going to
hmm.
sound like. So for that reason, I've stayed away from that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because would you also find you're not necessarily getting the credit when they say buy a beat randomly
Yeah,
like that?
yeah, absolutely. Like again, it's up to the person who purchases it, and if they decide to put your name on it, type of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, there are people that have like license that have this like art of selling beats online and that perfected, and they have
Hmm.
like certain licenses, and it's like okay, you have to give me a certain percent
Yeah.
and all that type of thing.
Hmm.
Um, a certain percentage up front and uh, yes, and that type of thing, and say, okay, well, you have to give me 50% of the track when it's all said and done. My name has to be here, and that type of thing. But typically, I'm not as big on selling beats online anymore.
Hmm. Right. Right.
I just like to
Uh,
put out my own I'm just working on my own projects.
okay. Are you like ever concerned with like label representation or anything like that? Is that something you've considered?
Um, do you mean like if a label approached me?
Yeah, like they gave you some kind of a deal to work with one of their artists for a certain project or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't really gotten that opportunity yet, but if I did, it would have to be like a situation that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
it probably would have to be like a label, like like a Fat Beats or something in that type of lane of hip hop.
Right, right. Like I could see you getting in with even a Royce the 5'9" type.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Um, and like what would you say in terms of how much you produce? Are you like every day in there making beats, or is it kind of more like uh when I feel like it thing?
Every day, because before when it used to be like when I feel like it, then I found after a while when I just like used to audit what I did at the end of the year, like I just would have a spreadsheet and just record kind of like what I did.
Hmm.
And I didn't get the production that I would have liked. So I just kind of go in there, whether or not I feel like it or not, more often, even on the days that I don't feel like doing anything. And even if I don't come up with anything, in the grand scheme of things, I find that I definitely get more done.
Mm. Do you think it's almost like a muscle? Like you get worse when you're not doing it every day?
I think so. I think you're
Uh,
right.
okay, interesting. Yeah, like other it's funny because other people I've talked to have said similar things. Like they literally every day are just like putting creating the work you guys put in is insane to me. Uh, and it seems like you could literally just make music all day, nonstop.
Like, even if I don't make a beat, like if I, email somebody, or if I, find go through some records for like, a half hour, at least I feel like I'm doing something. On
Right.
days that like I don't feel like doing anything or I'm really busy. So I
Hmm.
find even like little things like that, just the fact that I've done something, it makes kind of mentally, I think it helps.
Yeah. So what's like your biggest challenge with this? Like, do you have, I'll put it this way, do you have a big goal with this? Like, do you want to see yourself as, say, like the next Pete Rock or Jay Dilla or someone like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody wants to be recognized for their music to that extent. Like, I think that would be kind of the long term goal, and I think most people that are serious kind of have that goal.
Hmm.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the only way, really, like nowadays, is just to keep on putting out quality projects and hopefully over time just being recognized.
Hmm. Right. Is that something you would say is like your big piece of advice for people who are looking at beat makers? Is it like literally just a numbers game of putting stuff out, and then because I see you working with Ghetto Socks, and you've got like you're on this new collaborative album with Ghetto Socks, and that has Sky Zoo and Rome Streets and Artifacts and all these artists. Like, was it just a matter of you got on that radar and now they know you and they're starting to reach out to you, sort of thing too?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm,
The thing is that before, like when I first started, I was playing a fool's game. I have to tell people, whoever is listening to this, just because I don't want anybody to fall down like the same pit, the have the same pitfalls as me. But one thing I was doing wrong was I was just kind of like sending beats out blindly, just
okay.
like hoping to get placements on other people's albums. And but when you depend on other people like that to come through, and that like it's just I don't think it's a recipe for long term success. So I flipped the narrative and I just kind of started working on my own projects. And when I did that and it helped my name get out there more, which then increased my chances of getting placements on other people's projects, which is backwards, but
Hmm.
that's that's how it's worked out for me so far.
Gotcha.
Um, and the other pitfall was I can't remember what I was just going to say, but oh yes, the other one very important is building locally.
Ah.
I know, like nowadays with the internet, people are saying building locally isn't as important, which may be somewhat true, but it's still very important because almost every big artist has blown up in their city before going internationally.
Hmm. That's it's like the Jay-Z line, right? Where he says something about you not being big, like you go to your city and nobody knows you type thing. And I found that similarly with my clothing brand too. Initially, I just went straight online and just focused on promoting it that way. But there's something to be said about actually like getting to know people in your community and finding support there. I would say like most of my sales come from people in Halifax at this point, and it's yeah. Despite me being adamant that Art Pays Me is an international brand, it's like still local is important.
Oh yeah, but you bring up some interesting points, because like I find too in person, like if I sell a beat to somebody in person and I know I can work with that person in person, that's like one thing. But online, I can't really, I don't know what the other person is going to do.
Hmm.
Um, but the other thing is, you bring up an interesting point about it being an international brand and that type of thing.
Hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, is there's something about people. There's a level of trust, I guess, that has to be established, and if you can get people locally to trust you, eventually it spills out in a wider way, I guess you could say.
Do you find that it was harder to get support locally than, say, in outside the province? Because I have found that.
In some ways, yes, and I can see how that would definitely happen music-wise too, because you often think of local musicians as whack and that's not true.
No,
But that's a lot of times people do that, and I can see that like, oh, someone from Toronto is like, let me pay attention to them, or from this place, from that place. Don't even realize someone in your backyard is actually making similar music, or in some ways better music. And yeah, for me with the clothing brand, I found that once I started to get a bigger social media following that wasn't local, then more local people started to care, if that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely.
It's so funny, like with a lot of this stuff, it's optics. So even when I did my first fashion show, the brand wasn't really that known, but because I now had like high quality photos and people on a runway, the optics made people more likely to buy. So and the quality of the clothing didn't change. So it's funny how, like, I can see you now, like if you get featured on somebody's album who's a known name somewhere else, all of a sudden local rappers are gonna start reaching out to you in a bigger way. And it's like that probably shouldn't happen that way, but human behavior is interesting that way.
It's true. I agree 100% with what you just said.
Yeah,
It's like people don't recognize, what you're doing until something happens in another place, which is
yeah.
strange.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess we're lucky in that sense that we have the internet, so we have that option, so we can do that. And it's the other reason too, like we talked about the importance of building locally, but it would also, I guess, mean it's important to not only focus on local, even though local is important. Because I've seen that too, where people get hyper focused on local, but and it works for them. So I can't knock people for it. However, for that same reason, like you just sometimes just having that outside credibility, it helps. It helps. Uh,
I find Halifax is like a difficult city in some ways to like build locally. Like I find you really have to like kind of put in your, put in your time, do your work and actually like show up to events and shake hands and that
yes.
type of thing. And in a way, it's almost harder, almost easier in a big city to to network because I find in big cities there will often be events and you can just like free events and that type of thing, and you can literally just show up and kind of just meet who you want type of thing and network and everyone is doing the same. But here it seems like it's actually more difficult.
Why do you think that? Do you think is it because there's less events, or because people there's more of a cliquish behavior?
I wouldn't necessarily say cliquish be just because I mean, I think that overall, I think that like Halifax is like an accepting place. Like once you kind of you show up a few times, and that I think that most people you kind of accept you into their group or whatever you're trying to doing.
Hmm.
But I find that like in bigger cities, I guess where there's more what we say outsiders,
Hmm.
right? I think that more people are trying to do the same thing, and it almost seems like everybody's starting from like the same place. But here, it's like there's been groups that are like different cliques and stuff, like you said, that have been established like for years
Mm,
and that type of thing. And it's maybe a little bit harder to get in, if that makes
right.
sense.
No, I get that. I think it's almost like in a bigger city, almost everyone is technically an outsider, maybe.
Yeah,
So
that's what I mean.
yeah, right. Yeah. So everyone's an outsider. So you just naturally trust outsiders. And yeah,
Like,
that makes sense.
like for example, New York. Like I don't. Most people aren't actually from New York.
Right.
You know, like
I I went there a few years back, and it was amazing that we heard like so many different accents on one block, and not one of them was an actual New York accent. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, like I went, I think 2 years ago, there was like just some free events and stuff like that that I went to. And
Hmm.
one of them was like, there's a record label, it's called Rostrum Records. I think they used to have Mac Miller was one of their like clients,
Mm,
and like Wiz Khalifa. Like I think those guys were some of their clients, but they had a free um I guess like listening event, and because what they did is they re-released this record from 1988 that I think MC Light was on Chub Rock, like a lot of what I would consider to be like old rap,
yeah.
but they re-released it and they had like a party and they had like kind of like they gave out lemonade like and like lots of props. You can get your picture taken, and there was like guest speeches and they're kind of talking about the state of the union on hip hop and that type of thing in the
Mm,
city, which is like cool because like you said, like literally anybody can come from off the street and you can talk to anybody, you know what I mean? But here it
mm.
doesn't really seem to be like that for whatever reason.
So, what's next for you, Ashley? Like, do you have anything that you want to promote or?
Well, yeah, I have two upcoming projects. So the first project is a 8-track EP
Okay.
with Justo the MC from Brooklyn, New York, who is the MC that you mentioned on Keep It Real.
Yeah.
And I also have a collaborative album with Ghetto Socks coming out sometime this year, hopefully, depending on when we can finish the recording due to the pandemic. But that's going to be a special project.
Mm.
We have some good names on there, like we have Sky Zoo, OC, Rome Streets, etc.
Man, like I got to get him on the podcast too, Ashley. His his um his voice, the way he puts rhyme schemes together, like it's elite. It's elite. Always been a fan of Ghetto Sauce's music. So how do people get in touch with you? What's your social media handles and all that
Um,
stuff?
Well, so I have a website. It's dkproducer.com. And
Yeah.
then from there, you can get my Twitter, Instagram. Well, I don't really tweet a whole lot.
Mm.
Instagram, Facebook. But I would just say the easiest place is just you can get reach on Instagram. My handle is DK_producer.
Okay. And you know what? Actually, on Instagram, I was checking it out today. Are those little like snippets of unfinished tracks that you're working on?
Yeah, it's just all unfinished. Sometimes what I do is I just post up snippets of beats and just see
Hmm.
what the people's reaction is. So if
Ah,
people
okay.
like it, and I'm saying, okay, well, maybe I'll keep this for something. It's just interesting because stuff that you think is mediocre, other people like, and vice versa. Like you just don't know. I find how people are going to react.
Yeah. No, I actually I like that. I think it's smart for a producer to do stuff like that. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole a little bit of just checking them all out. And I play with designs for my brand like that sometimes. I'll just like do a little sketch and throw it out just to see what the reaction is, and that'll determine whether or not it becomes a clothing thing or not, or
That's
I
a good
do
idea.
more with it. Yeah. So
Yeah, one of the problems I found recently though is that it seems for whatever reason, Instagram seems to be hiding more like authentic engagement
yes.
in terms, and they like prioritize the paid stuff. So you wonder, like I post one beat and say like 50 people like it, but I
Hmm.
post like one that I think is just as good, if not better, the next day, but they decide not to show that. Does that mean that it's not good? Right.
Hmm.
So, you know,
Yeah, the old social media marketing is like you take it for as a grain of salt at this point too, because like I used to get shy about promoting or putting things out multiple times because I'm like I posted about that 3 times already. Say I don't want to post it again, but then I finally like work up the courage, if you call it that, to post the thing again. And so many people will be like, I love that. I've never seen, like, how long has it been in your store? Or like, it's been in my store for like a year. Like, and you've never seen it? And it's like, no. It's like, the algorithms are hiding things. So
especially for Twitter, I find there's so many tweets. Like you just have to tweet about the same thing 3 times basically for somebody to see it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's your lesson, folks. Don't think that you're don't feel guilty about promoting yourself and putting stuff out multiple times, because it's the only way it's going to get seen sometimes.
That's true.
Yeah. So DK, thank you for jumping on Art Pays Me.
Okay, thank you. Nice talking to you.
Yes. Take care.
You too.
Thank you so much for listening to the Art Pays Me podcast. Thank you to Langy Beats for the theme music. If you got anything out of this show, please rate, review, and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. The more you do this, the more reach the podcast gets, and the more artists I can help learn to make a living at what they love. If you want to know more about what I do, hit me up at artpaysme.com or at artpaysme on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest. See y'all next time.